Hello world! If you're anything like me, the first batch of Overwatch Story Missions has ultimately left you wanting more. And as we won't be getting any more until next year, we at least now have plenty of time to think on what those next missions might be. There are no confirmed details at present for how those missions will be released, financial or otherwise, so I'm just here to look at the story mode's initial lore to figure out where Overwatch itself heads next. Null Sector's plans are pretty inscrutable as they stand, but the gang do have options to explore, and it's not just Null Sector they need to be worried about. So, while only one of these future missions is confirmed, everything I'll be exploring here has some basis in the story, as presented to us through the story missions, the event missions, and the intel database, and will include Genji and Zenyatta in Suravasa, Subjugation, Shambali, and the Iris, Null Sector's mysterious energy resource, Null Sector's covert mass production, further Subjugator attacks, and the Wargod Initiative. And that's just relating to Null Sector. In more Overwatch-related terms, we could also be looking at Soldier chasing ghosts, re-establishing Overwatch in space, and General Osei and the Petras Act. And there'll be a few quick questions of my own at the end about more general background stuff. There's a fair amount of setup for the future in this new story mode release, but of course that doesn't mean that all of these ideas will come to fruition. So what we're going to do is start with what we do know. Genji seeking out Zenyatta in Suravasa, India, was first shown years back now in the original Overwatch 2 trailer, and the mission's development was then even explored at BlizzConline. So with Genji saying in the story missions that he needs to seek Zenyatta out, and the Talon Zenyatta cliffhanger at the very end of the story missions, we can now say with near certainty that the Suravasa Temple mission will be in the next mission release. That's actually pretty straightforward, but it's not all we have to go on. It was apparently the mention of the Iris in Null Sector's propaganda that specifically drew Genji's attention. The Iris is the reason that Zenyatta's important here. And then Zenyatta's flashback revealed that the Iris itself has a physical representation in Shambali that still remains after Aurora's awakening. So, when Null Sector's subjugation is said to be taking Omnic's memories and souls from their bodies and putting their intelligence cores into a reset loop as they are welcomed into the Iris, it suggests to me that replicating the Iris, or the moment of the awakening, is part of Ramattra's ultimate plan. Showing each Omnic every other Omnic's memories to kickstart a revolution or a transcendence perhaps. And if that is the case, a physical representation of the Iris could be an invaluable piece in allowing that all to happen, as its very existence suggests that it can be interacted with or even used to facilitate such a process. So for my money, the Suravasa rescue would lead quite cleanly onto a Shambali mission, especially as we'd finally have Zen's insights on the matter. This could potentially be set against Ramattra himself for control of the Iris, and could fit in immediately after Suravasa, or quite easily be reserved as a later plot point. Either way, Nepal has a nice existing set of maps to work with for a mission here, 3 control points and the monastery, so I'd say this general setup is very likely to appear eventually, but only potentially in the set of missions headed up by Suravasa. But regardless of Ramattra, we still have to deal with the greater Null Sector in the meantime. Understanding his goals is one thing, but stopping the army would also help. To that end, during Resistance, Winston points out the unusual energy relay in the dropship, which appears to be ubiquitous across Null Sector tech, powering it all from an external source. His notes then show that he considers this the key puzzle piece to Null Sector's operation, suggesting it's where the core team would focus their efforts while Torbjorn investigates the subjugation. But while energy provision could link back to industry giants such as Lumerico or Volskaya, the fuel itself is also noted as particularly unusual. Echo's analysis of jump jet propellant confirms that it is neither nuclear or fossil fuel, and that it has very strange volatile properties. Then Torbjorn's research on Stalker orbs revealed a strange plasma that dissipated into thin air on release. This could reignite the old mysterious energy source storylines from all the way back in Cassidy's Train Hopper comic and the Infiltration short, but could just as easily all tie straight back to Ramattra again and his link to the Iris, or perhaps the Void. So, energy resources are one thing, but the purposes for that energy are yet another. As Brigitte raises the point, how did Null Sector manage such mass-scale production without anyone noticing? Now, we know the answer to this. We know from Ramattra's Reflection short story that he took control of Anubis' old personally built Omnium around 10 years ago. This Omnium was said to be built deep underground, hidden away and untouched since the Omnic Crisis, thanks to its locale, with an access point in a mysterious icy valley, its metal gateway half buried under ice and stone. So that's how. However, we also know that the Omnium's reactivation follows the same kind of timeline as the Antarctic anomaly getting worse, with May's current readings showing the same kind of environmental effects as seen in the Omnic Crisis. But as she says, nothing should be using that kind of power anymore. Except perhaps an Omnium? Echo has also pointed out that the invasion units themselves are new robots, compared to the leftover Crisis-era bots of the Uprising event, which confirms recent production. So, the team now have indications of an operational Omnium controlled by Null Sector. And they've also got a clue as to where it might be. Torbjorn notes that the Titan's hull was coated with a frost-phobic lubricant, like it was operating in sub-zero temperatures. And so as far as I'm concerned, that is confirmation, for us at least, that the Anubis Omnium is the Antarctic anomaly. The idea of the Titan operating in sub-zero climate is actually backed up by the hull specifically being the element that's coated, as that means that this wasn't a response to the internally placed ice bomb from 0 Hour. The hull is on the outside, right? This isn't a tactical adaptation to Overwatch. This frost-phobic lubricant is for the Titan's base operation. They'd be based close to their Omnium ready to deploy, and so needing frost-phobic lubricant, that again points us towards Antarctica. There's even the still unexplained polar skins and the way they were promoted as a distinct Overwatch team standing above an icy valley that definitely makes me think this is an eventual mission we'll be coming to. But I think it'd be kinda hasty to include it in the next batch. The clues are all there, I just imagine they're playing the long game with this plot thread. This is the Anubis Omnium that's been masquerading as the Antarctic anomaly for years at this point that's allowing the invasion itself to happen. We're not taking that down anytime soon. That all said, the invasion itself could also have come about through connections to Vishkar through Talon in this instance, perhaps with them providing instant giant dropships out of Hardlight so that the invasion itself could just work properly. However, the Talon-Null Sector connection hasn't been properly fleshed out at all yet, so I'd wait and see on that one. The same goes for Ramattra's nanite abilities. They could absolutely be involved here, but there's nothing concrete on that at all. So, let's look at a much more straightforward option. As suggested implicitly by the campaign itself, further subjugation. More attacks on populations with high proportions of Omnics, such as the heavily overused and recently used King's Row, or more underused places, please, like Numbani, or perhaps Dorado. If they want to make Iggy a hero, by all means use King's Row again, keep using it, that's fine, or at least canonize Underworld. But I imagine an attack on Numbani especially would be a great way to bring Orisa into the core storyline, as well as just being a fresh mission setting. That said, we do also have an existing mission setting it'd be good to actualize on. Canonizing Underworld would really do wonders for them as they stand. And not just because it's so close to canon, but not really, that it actually harms the cohesion of the world they're presenting. It could use a little more polish to feel like a canon part of the story, but the event itself would be enough. That would help the invasion feel more genuinely global. The problem is, the Underworld contains a further, far greater element than itself that's way too close to canon to also not confirm. The Wargod Initiative. They absolutely have to make this an official part of the story now. Like, I'm an Iggy stan, but Underworld pales in comparison to this idea. The Null Sector mythic skin of the Null Sector themed season has its own lore description detailing the failed replication of Anna Amari's consciousness into a robotic frame, and she's not even the only one. The War God even appears and is specifically referenced, as unusual, by Iggy in Underworld itself. It's all so close to canon that tearing it away from that, or just not saying anything about it, would feel kind of disingenuous, like they don't actually have faith in their own cool-ass idea. I really hope they don't make this an AU, as this feels like an absolutely wild opportunity for the future of the campaign. It not only presents a substantial further threat and a whole new angle for Overwatch to deal with, but also provides far greater enemy variety in the game itself that can also allow for some story through self-reflection from the affected characters in the moment. And when you think about the whole thing, never mind the implications you can make about Echo, and the tech that makes her what she is. Like, replicating a consciousness is kind of her entire deal. How would that feel to have the basis of your being used to create tortured bastardizations of the people you love for the sole purpose of killing? I don't know, and none of us will if it's not canonized. I can't confirm that any of that will develop any further, but it'd be incredible if it did. So, that's all the potential upcoming missions related to Null Sector. Some with locations, more with just a general objective to follow. Only Suravasa being truly confirmed at all, likely for the next batch, but as that mission points out, Null Sector aren't the only concerns on Overwatch's mind. Talon are obviously a massive player in this whole scenario, but their involvement hasn't been expanded on properly yet, with Suravasa likely being where the story will start to do so properly, if even just asking the same questions we are. So yes, Talon are an obstacle to be explored, but as to how and why, nothing concrete established yet, so I'm going to move on to the soldier chasing ghosts. After evacuating Toronto with a new Overwatch, Sojourn insists that Jack Morrison is the person they really need back in charge to have any real hope. Cassidy then points out that Jack is off chasing ghosts, and Sojourn is the person they actually need to give them the clarity to function. However, considering that Cassidy knows this, and has had Baptiste's links to Talon and Sombra encrypted in Baptiste's agent file, and we know that Sombra is going to be meeting up with Soldier 76 in the upcoming Heroes Ascendant story collection, you can start to see a neat little covert op forming there, right? Even as an event mission, a private rendezvous of the Scallywags could be a great way to explore these more dubious characters, or even expand on the Energy Source storyline as mentioned before, as both Sombra and Soldier have had long-standing ties to Lumerico. This is, again, not something that will definitely exist. Seeking out Soldier 76 is just a line of thinking that gets brought up and could be explored at a point, but it could also eventually devalue the story beat it was originally a part of if Jack Morrison does come back to lead the new Overwatch instead of Sojourn. We can absolutely go find him, but that doesn't mean he has to rejoin. Sojourn deserves the opportunity to make good on the group's faith in her, but then Soldier is also pretty deserving of something like a covert mission to raise the ethical questions about his time in charge, dive a bit more into the hunt for Talon, and just show us exactly where he's at outside of Overwatch. But to dive back into Overwatch, Winston may finally have the chance to re-establish them in space. Chat logs with the White Hat hacker Harold in Winston's files reveal that they got some help locating the Null Sector attacks through accessing an old relay satellite. However, the connection is said to not be stable enough for long-term use, which means they can't rely on it as it stands much beyond the missions we've been on. So, as Watchpoint Gibraltar has a space shuttle and a launch pad, and there's already one existing space map in Horizon Lunar Colony, I think we could be heading up to fix this satellite sometime in the near future. There's a cool opportunity here to have this mission replace the currently available missions at a point, as well as the surveillance goes down at a crucial moment in the new story missions or something. It could even work equally well as a canon event mission, just allowing Overwatch to maintain its standard operation against Null Sector, sort of like a side quest. There's a bunch of cool possibilities with this idea, but it's not exactly the most pressing. Speaking of, though, the final element to truly explore here is one that will likely become far more pressing as the invasion goes on, or potentially even only once it's been resolved. The Petras Act. Following Paris and Rio, a General Osei of the UN immediately sent Winston a message bewildered at Overwatch's actions and told him to not make an enemy of me over breaking the Petras Act. This is of course the law that prevents Overwatch operation, and so has Winston truly scared. And I don't blame him. However, this does raise the possibility of law enforcement or bodyguard good guy enemy units down the line, which would help immensely for allowing things like Talon or even Null Sector-led missions, on top of the potential for Overwatch finally clashing with the powers that stand above them. So, those are the more defined plot lines openly set up by the new story mode. But I still have a few questions about some of the things that have been left unsaid. Firstly, what exactly about Talon? We know we're going to fight their new iteration in Suravasa, and that they're a key element to ultimately clash with, but to me, the Talon characters themselves are the ones really begging for missions set from their perspective to actually expand on what they're doing and why. For example, seeing the attack on the Temple of Anubis from Valkyrie by fighting through Helix security as Talon could be absolutely huge for the story itself, and again, just a great setting for a series of encounters. Ultimately, my vibe is we shouldn't have to only play as Overwatch in the story. And then, when you say that, you just gotta jump to the Junkers. I wonder how the Omnic racists will respond to a global robot invasion. And then I wonder, far less rhetorically, why we haven't seen or heard anything of that yet. And finally, something we've at least heard and seen bits of, but that kind of feel a bit left in the past, the remaining independent Omniums. Siberia and the East China Sea, the Gishin and all that. The very reasons that Zarya and D.Va are who they are. There'd better be something here, especially as those Omniums don't seem allied with Null Sector exactly. The Genesis reveal of multiple god programs could be kind of like a sleeper storyline that'll crop up with those later on. But for now, it feels like the existing Omniums that started Omnic Crisis 2 are being just pushed aside because they raise too many questions. Hopefully they can raise those questions in-world, so we can eventually regain some cohesion there. I'd love to know what's going on with those. There's also a few pieces of encrypted info in the new character bios in the Intel database that don't feel fully explored yet. Some of them we absolutely know what those encrypted pieces of info are, but for those where we don't know the info from other sources, their very nature as encrypted means we can't exactly know what they'll develop into. I might do a video on those on their own in the future, but please do let me know if there's anything key in those bios I've missed in the comments down below. In fact, let me know whatever your thoughts are down there, because that's the full scope of potential missions I can see. We've got Genji and Zen versus Talon in Suravasa, further developments with the Iris, likely at Shambali, and those are likely tied to the Subjugation. We've got Null Sector's weird external energy source, whatever's going on there. Null Sector's Omnium, likely in Antarctica. There's further subjugations to explore, of course, hopefully somewhere like Numbani. And then there's the Wargod Initiative, if they're choosing to fully execute on that. And if they do, that could tie to Oslo, Norway, if there's a connection to Echo as well. Thinking then back to Overwatch itself, we have Soldier chasing ghosts, which, going after Soldier 76, you could do that at a bunch of different Talon locales. There's a number of those to be explored a bit more in the world. We then also have fixing the relay satellite, likely to be set not on this world at all, but on Horizon Lunar Colony. And then there's General Osei and the Petras Act, which that could even result in something like an invasion of Watchpoint Gibraltar. Again, only Suravasa, the first one, is confirmed, but it's also very likely to be in the next mission release. The rest is very up in the air, with some unlikely to see missions anytime soon anyway, if ever. But that's the future of the Overwatch story mode as it stands. or at least how it appears to me. I hope you've enjoyed my perspective on the upcoming missions, and that you found some fun in the initial invasion itself, because that's all from me for this video. Thanks for staying with me, friends. I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Take care of each other out there, and may the glorious light of Beskil shine within you. Bye-bye.